The announcement echoed through the crowded terminal. Final boarding call for Flight 287 to Seattle. Grace Miller ran her boots striking the polished floor in rapid rhythm, coat flaring behind her like wings caught in the wind. Her heart beat in sync with every step, not from exhaustion but anticipation. This wasn't just a flight. It was her chance. Her shot. The job she had worked 2 shifts a day for. The dream she had dared to believe in. Then a sound. Fragile. A breath that broke. A man crumpled near a row of chairs, his cane clattering to the floor. His hand gripped his chest, his face pale and strained. No one noticed. Except Grace. She stopped. Ahead of her, the gate door blinked its final warning. Behind her, a stranger was slipping away. 1 step forward meant a future earned. 1 step back meant letting it all go. Grace turned and chose the stranger. She didn't know then that by walking away from everything she was walking straight into something greater. Grace didn't see herself as a hero. Just a 34-year-old woman from Ohio working 2 jobs to keep the lights on and the rent paid. In the mornings, she waited tables at a small diner on 6th Street. In the evenings, she cared for elderly patients at a local hospice, helping them eat, sleep, remember. She had no savings, no fancy degrees. But what she had was heart and quiet strength. Raised by her grandmother after losing both parents young, Grace learned early that kindness wasn't something you gave when it was easy. It was something you chose especially when it was hard. Seattle wasn't just a job, it was a purpose. A non-profit working with children with disabilities had finally called her in. She could barely believe it when they said, "We'd like to meet you in person." And for a moment, she let herself dream. She didn't know that dream was about to be tested in the most human way possible. The morning of her flight, Grace stood at the bus stop with a backpack too small for her hopes and a heart too full to speak. The January wind cut through her coat, but she barely noticed. She was early. She always was. Clutched in her hand was a printout of her boarding pass, creased slightly faded from being folded and unfolded too many times. She had checked the flight status 7 times the night before. This was it. As the bus pulled in, she smiled faintly. Her reflection in the glass looked tired but determined. She had made it this far, just a little further. At the airport, she navigated security nerves bundled up like wires under her skin. A message from the hiring manager buzzed in. "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at 9 a.m. She whispered back, "Me too," like it was a prayer. She didn't know the next hour would turn that whisper into a storm. The security line had taken too long. She checked the time, 34 minutes until takeoff. Gate 22 was on the other end of the terminal. She broke into a run. The rolling wheels of her suitcase clacked against the tiles as she weaved through families, business travelers, and coffee carts. Her breath quickened. Her legs burned. Her mind raced through every sacrifice she'd made to get here. The speakers overhead crackled. Final boarding call for Flight 287 to Seattle. Final call for Grace Miller. She was close now. She could see the number 22 blinking ahead like a finish line. Her hand gripped her boarding pass tighter. Then a sound. A soft, guttural cough, followed by the unmistakable thud of something or someone hitting the ground. She turned her head, just for a second, and what she saw froze her in place. An old man lay slumped beside a row of empty seats, his cane rolled several feet away. One hand clutched at his chest. The other trembled in the air, reaching for someone. People passed by without slowing. Eyes down, headphones in, a rushing world too busy to notice. But Grace saw him. She stood frozen. Ahead, her gate so close she could almost hear the flight attendant closing the doors. Behind her, a stranger's silent cry for help. Her chest tightened. This was it, and the moment her year had built toward, now balanced on a breath. She took 1 step forward, then stopped. Her mind screamed, "Go! Run! You can still make it!" But her heart whispered, "Turn around. He needs you." Grace's hand loosened around her boarding pass, and then she turned back. Grace dropped to her knees beside the old man. His face was pale lips tinged blue. His breath came in short, desperate gasps. One trembling hand fumbled at his coat pocket, the other still clutched his chest. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, voice steady despite the panic rising inside. He nodded barely. "Nitro. Pocket. Pill." She reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small orange pill bottle. Hands shaking, she opened it and slipped one tablet beneath his tongue. "Hold on," she whispered. "Just breathe with me." Her fingers found her phone. She called 911, voice firm now, urgent. Male, late 70s cardiac symptoms, terminal Begate, 20. "We need paramedics now." She stayed by his side, counting each breath, her other hand gripping his tightly. When the EMTs arrived minutes later, they asked if anyone would accompany him. Grace didn't hesitate. She rode in the ambulance, never once looking back at the gate. The hospital lights were harsh, humming faintly above her. Grace sat on a plastic chair outside the ER, her coat draped over her knees, hands still smelling faintly of the antiseptic wipes she'd used to clean his hands in the ambulance. Doctors and nurses moved in practiced rhythm beyond the swinging doors. The old man, Arthur, she'd learned, was stable now. The nitro pill had likely saved his life, but it was the speed of her response, they said, that made the difference. Grace stared at the floor, her backpack at her feet like a discarded hope. She pulled out her phone. 9:48 a.m. Her heart sank. The plane had taken off 40 minutes ago. Seattle was gone. The job interview, the one she had spent 12 months preparing for, was gone. She looked down at the crumpled boarding pass in her hand. Then quietly she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her earrings, simple silver studs, the only new thing she'd bought for the interview. She slipped them off and tucked them back into the pouch, and whispered. It was still the right thing. Grace unlocked her phone with slow fingers. A message from the nonprofit blinked at the top. "Just checking in. Are you nearby?" She stared at the screen for a long moment. Her thumbs hovered, then began to type. "I'm so sorry. I had a medical emergency at the airport. I won't make it to the interview. Thank you for the opportunity." She hit send. Just like that, it was over. She powered off her phone and slid it into her bag. A quiet thud, like closing a book you hadn't finished. Grace leaned back against the wall, eyes heavy, throat tight. She wasn't crying out of regret. It was deeper than that, the ache of knowing you did the right thing, and still lost everything. The hallway was quiet now. She exhaled and whispered, "Maybe that's just life." Grace wandered back into the terminal like a ghost. The world hadn't paused for her loss. People still rushed past, wheeling suitcases, laughing into phones, checking departure boards. The hum of announcements faded into white noise. She found a bench near a closed coffee kiosk and sank into it. Her backpack slumped beside her like a tired child. She sat there motionless, the cold from the floor seeping into her bones. A janitor sweeping nearby paused. He glanced at her with kind, weathered eyes. "You okay, miss?" She didn't look up, just nodded slightly. "Missed my flight," she said, voice flat. He didn't pry, just nodded like he'd seen 100 tired souls pass through this place. As he walked away, Grace finally looked up, and for the first time in hours, she asked herself quietly, what now? Grace had just begun to stand when a voice echoed across the terminal. "Miss Grace Miller, please proceed to Gate 4. Miss Grace Miller, you are requested at Gate 4. She froze. Gate 4, she hadn't told anyone where she was. Her flight had been at Gate 22. She wasn't expecting a rebooking, she had no money left. No contacts, no reason. She looked around uncertain. Was this a mistake? The janitor from earlier passed by again, gave her a half smile and said, "Better see what they want. You never know." Grace picked up her backpack slowly, muscles still heavy with fatigue. With cautious steps and a dozen questions churning in her mind, she began walking toward Gate 4. She didn't know it yet, but someone had been watching, and they weren't finished with her story. Gate 4 was quiet. No passengers, no boarding lines, just two men in dark suits standing near the gate desk. As Grace approached, one of them stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Miss Miller?" She nodded slowly. Wary, yes. He glanced at his tablet, then back up at her. "Mr. Harrington would like to meet with you." Her brow furrowed. I'm sorry, who?" The second man gestured toward a glass door just beyond the gate. "If you'll follow us, please." Still too stunned to protest, Grace followed them through the door and down a short hallway. Her footsteps echoed quietly on the polished floor. She clutched her backpack strap like it might anchor her to reality. They stopped in front of a private lounge. One man opened the door. Inside, the lights were low. The carpet was thick, and seated in a deep leather chair was the old man she thought she'd never see again. Grace froze in the doorway. The man sitting before her was a world away from the fragile figure she had knelt beside just hours earlier. Gone was the rumpled coat, the wheezing breaths the cane scattered on cold tile. Now he wore a navy blue suit pressed and elegant, a silk pocket square, leather shoes, a cup of tea balanced effortlessly in his hand. But his eyes, those eyes were the same, soft, a little tired, and unmistakably kind. He looked up and smiled warmly. "I was afraid I wouldn't see you again." Grace blinked. You're okay?" He nodded slowly. "Thanks to you." She stepped inside, unsure whether to sit or stand. Her mind struggled to catch up 1,000 unspoken questions rising at once. "Why am I here?" The man gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit. There's something you deserve to know." Grace lowered herself cautiously into the chair, heart pounding. The man set his teacup down and leaned forward, resting his elbows gently on his knees. "My name," he said, "is Arthur Harrington." She searched her memory. The name felt vaguely familiar. He smiled as if reading her confusion. "Founder and former CEO of Sky Legend Airlines." The words hit her like a gust of wind. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Before she could speak, her eyes flicked to the room around her. There was a faint smell of peppermint tea, a photo frame tilted slightly on the shelf, an old black-and-white picture of a young pilot smiling beside an aircraft. It was him. Same smile, same eyes, only decades younger. "Wait, you own the airline?" He gave a soft chuckle. "Technically, my children run most of it now, but I still like to wander airports from time to time. You see people's true selves here, how they treat strangers, how they act when no one's watching." He looked at her, voice quieter now. "And yesterday, I saw something rare." Grace's breath caught. Something was unfolding, and she was at the very center of it. Arthur leaned back, his voice calm, but laced with something heavier. "You could have walked past me, Grace, like everyone else did." She lowered her eyes, unsure what to say. "But you didn't. You gave up your chance, your flight, your future to help a man who for all you knew was just a nobody." Grace swallowed. "I did what anyone should have done." He shook his head gently. "That's the thing. Most people wouldn't. Not in today's world, not with everything on the line." He looked out the window, his expression turning reflective. "I built this company decades ago with the belief that people mattered more than profits. But somewhere along the way, that got buried under quarterly reports and board meetings." He turned back to her. "Then I saw you, and you reminded me why I started it all." Arthur reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a phone. He dialed without hesitation, his tone shifting calm but commanding. "Yes, this is Mr. Harrington. I need the Seattle office to reschedule an interview. Grace Miller. Also, fly in the board of directors. I want them to meet her. Today." Grace sat frozen, eyes wide. "Wait, what are you doing?" He ended the call, then smiled gently at her. "Making sure you still get your chance." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "You don't have to do that, really. I didn't help you to get." He held up a hand. "I know. That's why you deserve it." Then softer. "Let's just say, I still have a few favors left in this world, and I'd rather use them on someone who believes in kindness more than credentials." Grace's voice broke. I don't know what to say. Arthur smiled. Then don't. Just say yes. Grace sat still, trying to catch up with what had just happened. An hour ago, she was staring at a crumpled boarding pass, feeling like her one shot at life had slipped through her fingers. Now, she was being offered a second chance, one she hadn't asked for, one she never imagined. She looked at Arthur, this man who had gone from fragile stranger to a figure of quiet power. You really think... I belong there? She asked barely above a whisper. He nodded without pause. You don't just belong. They need someone like you more than they know. Grace felt something shift inside her, a flicker of belief trying to rise after so many years of silence. She exhaled slowly, then gave a small, almost trembling nod. Okay, she said. Yes. Arthur smiled, and for the first time in days, so did she. A black car was already waiting outside the airport. One of Arthur's assistants handed her a sleek envelope inside a hotel keycard and a handwritten note. Rest well. Tomorrow is yours. A.H. Grace sat in the back seat, still clutching her backpack like armor. The city moved past the window golden in the late afternoon light, but her mind was quiet. For once, she wasn't replaying her mistakes. She was simply breathing. The car pulled up to a hotel she'd only seen in magazines, marble floors, glass chandeliers, doors that opened for you without touching them. She was shown to a quiet suite overlooking the city skyline. A welcome basket sat on the table, fruit tea, and a note from the nonprofit's director confirming the rescheduled meeting. Grace ran her fingers over the note, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe maybe this time, something good was really about to begin. The next morning, Grace stood in front of the full-length mirror in her hotel room. She wore the same blouse she'd packed for the original interview, wrinkled but clean, paired with her only pair of black pants. She smoothed the fabric with her palms and took a breath. No makeup, just a touch of lip balm. Her hair pulled back. She didn't have time or money for polish. But she had something else. Grace stepped into the elevator, her heart thudding in quiet rhythm. In the lobby, a staff member greeted her with a clipboard and a warm smile. Miss Miller, the directors are waiting. She was led through a quiet hallway to a private conference room. Inside sat 5 people each with poised expressions, notepads, and waiting eyes. She felt small, but grounded. And when the chair was pulled out for her, she sat not as someone begging for a job, but as someone who had already proven who she was, when no one was watching. The room didn't feel like an interrogation. No harsh lights, no ticking clocks, just a quiet space with sunlight filtering through tall windows and 5 pairs of eyes, curious but kind. The director, a woman in her early 60s, leaned forward with a soft smile. Grace, thank you for being here. We know. This isn't exactly how you imagined today would go. Grace gave a small, honest laugh. Not quite. The others chuckled, with her tension melting just enough to let truth in. We've already read your resume, another added, but we'd like to hear from you who you are and why this work matters to you. Grace nodded slowly. No rehearsed answers, no perfect script, just her voice. Because I've seen what happens when people are forgotten, she said, her tone steady. And I've spent my whole life trying not to let that happen. And in that moment, no one took notes. They just listened. Grace looked at the faces in front of her. She could have kept it simple, talked about skills, experience, goals. But something in the room gave her permission to be real. I grew up in Ohio. My parents passed when I was 10. My grandma raised me and my 2 younger brothers. She was a nurse, and the kindest person I've ever known. Her voice softened. I used to help her care for neighbors, people who had no one else. I guess that's where it started. I didn't know it would become a life. She paused. I've never had much. I've worked as a waitress, as a caregiver, paid bills late, skipped meals, but I've never regretted it, because every time someone looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you for seeing me," I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. She took a breath. This job would let me keep doing that, on a bigger scale. Silence. Then a quiet, collective nod. The room stayed quiet for a moment after Grace finished. No one rushed to speak. No one filled the silence with polite praise. They just looked at her with something softer than approval, something closer to respect. The director finally leaned back and said, "Thank you, Grace. That was everything we needed to hear." One of the board members stood and opened the door for her. "We'll be in touch very soon." Grace smiled, not out of certainty but out of peace. She gathered her things, nodded in gratitude, and stepped into the hallway. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. As she walked down the corridor, sunlight poured in through the windows, landing in warm streaks on the carpet. She didn't look back, because deep down, she already knew something had shifted. Grace stepped out of the elevator into the hotel lobby, heart still quiet but lighter. She expected to retreat to her room, maybe finally sleep. But there, waiting near a tall marble column, was Arthur. Still in his suit, hands clasped behind his back, he looked almost amused. So he asked, "How'd it go?" Grace smiled. "Better than I expected." They listened. Arthur nodded, pleased, then gestured for her to sit beside him on a nearby bench tucked into a quiet corner of the lobby. "You spoke from the heart. That's all anyone with sense ever needs." He paused, then looked at her more seriously. "But, Grace, I didn't bring you here just for that one job." She turned to him, confused. "What do you mean?" He reached into his jacket again this time, not for a phone, but for a small folder. "I'd like you to lead something new. Not just work for a non-profit. Build one with us." Grace stared at the folder in Arthur's hands. She didn't reach for it yet. She just looked at him, brows furrowed, trying to read between the lines. "You want me to lead something?" Arthur nodded slowly. "Sky Legend has the reach, the resources, but it lost its soul a while back. I've been waiting for the right person to help bring that back." He opened the folder and turned it toward her. Inside were draft documents, vision statements, budgets, a name at the top. Compassion in Flight, a Sky Legend Foundation initiative. "We want to create a program that serves elderly passengers, low-income travelers, caregivers. People like you, people you've helped." Grace blinked, stunned. "I've never led anything." Arthur smiled. "But you've lived it, and that matters more than any title ever will." He placed the folder gently in her hands. "What you did that day, that wasn't a reaction. It was who you are." Grace looked down at the folder resting in her lap. Director of Human Impact Programs. Her name already typed on the draft cover page. It didn't feel real. She ran her fingers over the embossed logo, then looked up at Arthur. "You're offering me something people spend their whole careers chasing." Arthur simply nodded, and most of them forgot why they chased it in the first place. Grace laughed softly, half disbelief, half awe. "But I was cleaning tables a week ago." "Exactly," Arthur said gently. "And last week you were also saving lives. It's not about where you've been, it's about what you carry." She looked out at the city skyline through the glass wall behind them. "What if I mess it up?" Arthur leaned in, voice calm and clear. "Then you'll fix it, but you'll never regret stepping up for something that matters." Grace closed the folder and held it to her chest. For a long moment, Grace said nothing. She simply held the folder, eyes lowered, her thumb, gently tracing the corner of the page like she was trying to feel the weight of what it meant. No confetti, no triumphant music. Just her a bench and the quiet breath between fear and faith. Then slowly, she looked up. "All right," she said softly. "I'll do it." Arthur smiled, not wide, not surprised. Just satisfied. "Good," he said, "because the world doesn't need more polished leaders. It needs people who remember what it feels like to be unseen." Grace nodded, her voice steadier now. "If I'm going to do this, I want it to be real. I want to show up for the people nobody notices." "That's why I chose you," Arthur said. He stood, gently offered his hand. "Welcome aboard, Director Miller." She rose, took it. Not as someone lucky, but as someone ready. Grace stepped into the Sky Legend headquarters 2 days later, not through the revolving glass doors as a guest, but with a security badge clipped to her blazer. It didn't feel like a promotion. It felt like a promise. The receptionist greeted her with a warm, "Good morning, Director Miller," and for a second she almost looked over her shoulder expecting the title to belong to someone else. But no one else was behind her. She walked the halls slowly, taking it all in the quiet hum of purpose, the walls lined with photos of destinations around the world, and now, a small corner office with her name on the door. No balloons, no applause, just a fresh notepad, a pot of coffee, and a team waiting for guidance. Grace took a deep breath, sat down at her new desk, and opened the folder Arthur had given her. First page, Compassion in Flight, Draft 1. She picked up a pen and began. Grace stood in front of a whiteboard in the small conference room they'd given her. The markers were still new, the walls still blank. But in her mind, she already saw it a program designed not from policy, but from memory. She drew one line across the board and wrote 3 words. No one ignored. Her first initiative wasn't flashy. It was personal. I want trained staff in every Sky Legend terminal who know how to recognize distress, especially in elderly passengers, people, traveling alone, caregivers. I want quiet rooms, rapid response teams, emergency med kits. Her voice was clear, her conviction unwavering. Because what if I hadn't heard him, she said to her new team. What if no one did? They nodded. Some took notes. Others just listened, quietly moved. Grace didn't build this with strategy. She built it from the hallway carpet where an old man once gasped for air. And she had knelt. Now she was making sure no one else had to choose between helping and missing their chance. Because helping was the chance. Just 3 weeks after launch, the first story came in. A gate agent at LAX noticed an elderly woman sitting alone for hours, trembling, her suitcase still zip-tied shut. He'd just finished a training Grace had written. Instead of walking past, he approached. Her name was Mrs. Alvarez. She didn't speak much English. Her husband had passed away a month earlier, and this was her first flight alone. Confused, scared to ask for help. Because of the new program, a translator was called. A quiet space was found. She made her flight, and when she arrived, her daughter emailed the airline, "Someone saw my mother today." Not just her boarding pass her. Grace read the message in her office, her hand resting on the printed words like they might disappear. She didn't cry. She just smiled. A small, tired, deeply grateful smile. Because this time someone else had chosen to turn back. The stories kept coming. A deaf passenger reunited with his interpreter before boarding. A young caregiver helped through security with her father in a wheelchair. Flight crews quietly thanking the new protocol that made compassion part of their checklist. Word spread. An article appeared in a travel magazine, "The Airline That's Choosing Kindness." Then another. Soon the media wanted to know, "Who's behind this?" Arthur answered with a photo, not a headshot. Just Grace, smiling beside an elderly couple she'd met at a terminal in Denver, clipboard and hand sleeves rolled up. When her team showed her the article, she smiled. They didn't need to use that picture. It's the only one we had, someone said. You're never in the frame. Grace just nodded. That's the point. She hadn't started this to be seen. She started it because someone once wasn't. It was a rainy afternoon in Seattle when Grace stepped into the airport for a routine check on one of the program's new support booths. As she walked past Gate 16, her pace slowed. That gate, that bench, the place where she had once sat heartbroken, holding a crumpled boarding pass and a silent prayer. She paused, and that's when she saw him. Arthur. Not in a suit this time, but in a windbreaker and wool scarf, sipping coffee from a paper cup like any other traveler. Their eyes met. He smiled. Still walking around airports alone, she asked, her voice warm. Still watching for people like you, he said. They sat side by side. No need for ceremony. So he asked, does it feel worth it now? Grace looked around the signage. She helped design the support team she trained, waving at a passenger in a wheelchair. More than I ever imagined, she said. And in that moment, neither of them needed to say anything more. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the movement of strangers with bags and destinations Grace would never know. Arthur took a slow sip of his coffee, then set it down carefully on the bench beside him. "You know," he said quietly, "I thought I built this company for legacy, for innovation, maybe even pride." He looked at her. "But the truth is, in all my years, no moment made me prouder than the one I watched from that cold tile floor when you turned back." Grace's eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. "I used to think kindness was something we added when convenient. You reminded me it should be where we start." He smiled, not with grandeur, but with something gentler. "Grateful. You didn't just save my life, Grace. You reset it." She blinked, quieted by the weight of the words. And all she could say was what she meant from the beginning. "I just did what I hoped someone would have done for me." Arthur glanced at his watch. "Well, looks like my flight's boarding." Grace stood with him. Unsure why it suddenly felt like more than just a goodbye for the day. He adjusted his scarf, picked up his bag, light practical. No chauffeur waiting this time. Just him, as he liked it, among the people. Before turning to go, he paused and looked back at her. "You know, Grace," he said softly, "everyone builds something in this life. A house, a family, a career." He smiled gently. "You built something better. You built a reason for strangers to stop and care." Grace's breath caught. Arthur reached into his coat pocket one last time and placed something in her hand, a simple brass pin shaped like a pair of open wings. "It's not from the company. It's from me." And with that, he turned, disappearing into the crowd like just another traveler. Grace looked down at the pin warm in her palm. She didn't cry, but she held it like a promise. From that day forward, Grace wore the brass pin on her blazer every meeting, every airport visit, every training session. It wasn't big. Most people didn't notice it right away, but those who did always asked the same question. What's the story behind the wings? And every time Grace smiled the same quiet smile. Sometimes she answered with a version of the truth. "It was a gift. From someone I helped once." Other times she simply said, "It reminds me why I do this." But no matter how she answered, something always happened after. People paused, softened, told her a story of their own about someone who helped them, or someone they should have helped. The pin became more than an object. It became a conversation, a mirror, and in a world that moved fast, Grace had found a way to make it stop just long enough for someone to feel seen. 1 year later, Compassion in Flight was no longer just a pilot program. It had grown into a full-scale initiative spanning over 200 airports worldwide, translated into 8 languages, trained over 12,000 airline staff. But what surprised Grace the most wasn't the numbers. It was what came after. Hospitals started adapting the model. So did train stations. Even corporate offices began contacting her team asking, "Can you teach us how to see people better?" The phrase "no one ignored" appeared on badges on banners on lapel pins across industries. Volunteers signed up. Former passengers wrote letters. One child sent Grace a drawing of a heart with airplane wings and the words, "Because someone was kind to my grandma." Grace kept that picture framed on her desk. Because no matter how far the program flew, it had started in silence with one choice on one cold floor. And now it was lifting others. The international press wanted a headline. Grace Miller, the waitress turned director, the face of a global movement, was being honored at a humanitarian awards ceremony in Geneva. The ballroom shimmered with lights. Camera shutters clicked. A host read a glowing introduction listing impact metrics, lives touched, change created. Grace stepped up to the podium, not in designer heels but in her usual flats, still wearing the brass pin. She looked out at the crowd. She could have told the whole story, the airport Arthur, the missed flight. It would have made headlines. But instead, she said this. "This isn't about me. It's about every person who stopped when they didn't have to. Every stranger who turned around when it was easier to walk on. I just happened to be one of them. And I got seen because someone chose to look back." She smiled softly. So, if you're looking for the real hero in this story, check the nearest mirror. And with that, she stepped down. Spotlight behind her, purpose ahead. Some nights, after long days and longer flights, Grace would find herself back at an airport, sometimes for work, sometimes just to walk. She always found her way to a quiet gate, a worn bench, the kind people usually passed without noticing. She'd sit, pull her coat tighter, and close her eyes. And in that stillness, she could feel it all again, the final boarding call. The rush, the moment she stopped. She thought of Arthur, his voice, his quiet presence, the gift of believing in people when they didn't believe in themselves. His words still echoed clear and steady. You built something better. You built a reason for strangers to stop and care. Grace opened her eyes not to look back but to remember why she kept going. Because some choices don't just change your life, they change how you carry it. And she had been carrying this one with pride, with purpose, every step since Gate 22. Grace sat quietly near Gate 10, sipping lukewarm tea, eyes scanning the movement of travelers. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am. What's that pin?" She looked down. A boy, no older than 10, stood beside her seat. Curly hair, backpack too big for his frame. He pointed to the brass wings on her lapel. Grace smiled. It's a reminder. Of what, he asked, genuinely curious. She paused, then leaned in a little closer. That it only takes one person to turn around and help someone. The boy nodded, like he understood more than he let on. "That's cool," he said. "I think I want to do that too." His mom called him from a few feet away. He waved, then ran off. Grace watched him disappear into the crowd, and quietly to herself whispered, "You already have." Because kindness doesn't need fanfare. Sometimes it starts with a question, and a pair of listening eyes. The headlines came quickly, catchy and clean, the simple woman who changed an industry. From waitress to world builder. Grace read them sometimes, usually by accident on screens in airports, forwarded articles from old coworkers. But that phrase always stuck, the simple woman. At first, she didn't like it. It sounded small, as if what she had done was born out of simplicity rather than strength. But over time, she began to see it differently. Simple wasn't weak. Simple meant choosing to help when no one's watching. Simple meant showing up even tired, even scared. Simple meant staying soft in a world that keeps asking you to harden. And if that's what they meant by simple, then maybe she was, gladly. She never chased the spotlight. But somehow, it had followed the one thing she had been chasing all along, compassion. The photo went viral within hours. It wasn't staged. Just a quiet moment on the tarmac during the launch of Sky Legend's newest humanitarian fleet. Arthur Harrington, leaning gently on a cane, now stood beside Grace, both smiling not to the camera, but to each other. The caption read, "2 generations, 1 vision. Compassion in motion." It was shared across continents. Reposted by CEOs, teachers, activists. Used in TED Talks, billboards, textbooks. Everyone saw the image, but only a few knew what they were really looking at. Not just a founder and a director, but a man once gasping for breath on a cold airport floor. And the woman who knelt beside him, not knowing he would one day change her life in return. Grace never corrected the stories, never gave the full interview, because she knew sometimes the most powerful moments don't need to be explained. They just need to be remembered. You've seen her by now. Maybe not in person, but in the photo, the woman with kind eyes standing beside a man whose name graces every terminal. You know her as the face of a movement. But now, you know the story, how Grace Miller missed the most important flight of her life to kneel beside a stranger, and how that single act of compassion lifted her higher than any plane ever could. She never sought recognition. She never asked for applause, because for her kindness was never a performance. It was a decision, a quiet one, the kind you make in one breath, in one step, in one heartbeat. And now, dear viewer, the question is yours. When your moment comes, will you turn away? Or will you turn back like she did if you've ever helped someone when it cost you something? if you've ever done the right thing with no one watching. Comment below, "I would turn back," because maybe, just maybe, that's how the world begins to change. One simple person at a time.